I've replayed the moment in my head so many times. It feels heavier now than when it happened. The story people know is simple. I lied to my husband. When he found out, he vanished forever. But that's not how it started. Not for me. For me, it began with a Tuesday afternoon and the sound of the rain against the roof of the little repair shop where I worked part-time. The kind of rain that made the world outside blur into gray streaks. I was tightening the last bolt on a customer's old bicycle when the door opened, the bell above it giving off its tired jingle. She walked in, mid-40s, coat still damp, eyes sharp but distant. The kind of presence that doesn't announce itself loudly, but shifts the air anyway. I knew her name already, because everyone in this town seemed to know hers. She was married, lived in the large brick house at the corner, the one with the roses climbing the fence. She set her umbrella down carefully near the counter, almost as if even that object carried weight. "My car," she said, pausing. "It keeps stalling when I slow down. Do you do that here, or only smaller things?" Her eyes flicked to the grease on my hands, then back to mine. I wiped my palms on a rag, suddenly aware of how young I must have looked to her, how unsure. "We do cars too," I said. "Depends what's wrong. I can take a look if you don't mind the mess." She gave a quick half-smile, not amusement exactly, more like recognition. Like she'd already read the hesitation in my voice, the way I avoided holding her gaze too long. While I pulled on gloves and stepped outside with her, the rain softened, the world hushed. Her sedan was parked crooked under the dripping awning, and she stood close as I leaned under the hood. Too close, maybe. Close enough that when she tucked a strand of damp hair behind her ear, I caught the faint scent of her perfume, something warm, not floral, lingering. She asked questions, not the kind customers usually ask, but softer, slower. "How long have you been working here? Are you studying too, or just this?" Each one landed like she wasn't just filling silence, but listening for something. I answered more than I should have, fumbling through half-sentences, and she didn't fill in the blanks. She just let them hang, her head tilted, her eyes steady. At one point, I dropped the wrench. It clattered against the concrete, louder than it should have been, echoing under the roof. She didn't laugh. She bent slightly, picked it up before I could, and pressed it into my hand. Her fingers brushed mine, just for a second, barely, but it made my chest tighten like I'd been holding my breath too long. Neither of us said anything right then. The rain picked up again, tapping against the hood, against the umbrella she'd left behind. I kept my eyes on the engine, but the weight of her silence beside me pressed in more than any words could. When I finally said, "It's probably the fuel pump," she nodded like she'd been expecting that answer all along. She thanked me, her voice calm, measured, and then, after a pause too long to be accidental, she added, "You're careful with details. Not everyone is." She left with her car sputtering slightly less than before, her umbrella forgotten by the counter. I could have run after her, but I didn't. Instead, I stood there, staring at the dark handle leaning against the wall, rainwater pooling beneath it. That umbrella stayed in the shop for 2 days. I told myself I should call her, return it, but I didn't. Because the truth is, I didn't want the umbrella gone. I wanted the excuse to see her again. And maybe that's where it really started. Something unspoken, small, but impossible to set aside. She came back on a Thursday evening, later than most customers usually did. The shop was half-lit, the floor still damp from where I'd mopped earlier, and I thought for a second she'd made a mistake walking in. Her umbrella was in her hand this time, the forgotten one from before. She set it on the counter between us and said lightly, "I believe this belongs here more than to me." I smiled, but she didn't return it. Her face was composed, polite, almost unreadable. Still, she didn't leave. Instead, she asked if I could take another look at the car, said the stalling hadn't stopped. There was something in the way she said it, an edge of weariness, like the car wasn't really the only thing wearing her down. We walked out to the lot together. The sky had turned that dusky violet where street lamps start to hum, and the air carried a bite of cold. She wrapped her coat tighter around herself, though her posture stayed straight, almost formal. I popped the hood again, the engine groaning in protest, and worked while she lingered nearby. She didn't ask many questions this time. Her silence was heavier, less curious. I caught myself glancing at her in the reflection of the windshield, the way she pressed her thumb against her palm absent-mindedly, like she needed to keep her hands busy just to stay steady. "Rough week?" I asked, more to break the air than anything. Her eyes flicked to me, quick, then back to the ground. Something like that. The words were flat, but the pause afterward was full, like she'd almost said more and thought better of it. I tightened a bolt, listening to the rhythm of her breathing just behind me. When she finally let out a small laugh, dry, tired, not really at me, I felt it more than heard it. I turned, and in that faint glow of the parking lot light, she looked different. Not older, not younger, just worn down, in a way she seemed determined to keep hidden. "You look like you haven't slept in days," I said before I could stop myself. That time, her lips parted like she might answer honestly, but she closed them again and shook her head. "Careful with observations like that," she murmured. "People might think you noticed too much." I wanted to say I couldn't help it, that I noticed everything about her. The way her hair fell loose around her face now, the faint tremor in her hands when she fumbled for her keys. But I didn't. I bent back over the engine instead, let the silence stretch. When I finally told her it would take a proper part replacement, she sighed, not annoyed, just resigned, as if the universe had been giving her too many small defeats lately. She thanked me softly, and when she reached for the hood to shut it, our hands brushed again. Not by accident this time. Neither of us pulled away quickly. Her fingers lingered against mine, light as a question, and though she looked down almost immediately, I caught the faintest flicker in her expression, like she was afraid of being seen and longing for it at the same time. That was the moment I knew. Whatever this was, it wasn't going to stay simple. The rain had started again that evening, hard enough to blur the streetlights outside the shop. We were alone, or at least I thought we were. She leaning over the car, inspecting the engine while I tightened a bolt that had been giving me trouble for the last 10 minutes. The air between us felt charged in a way that wasn't about the rain or the dim light. "Do you ever feel like things are stuck?" she asked suddenly, voice low, almost a whisper, but steady enough to make me pause. I didn't answer right away, my hands frozen mid-motion. "Stuck." She didn't glance at me, just kept her eyes on the engine. But the tilt of her head, the faint tremor in her fingers as she held the hood, spoke louder than her words. "Sometimes I think people tell themselves stories," she continued, "to make things simpler than they are." Her eyes flicked to mine briefly. Then she looked away. I wanted to say something, anything, that wouldn't sound foolish. Instead, I nodded. Let the silence stretch. Let it hum with all the things we weren't saying. She leaned closer to point at a part of the engine, our shoulders brushing. A tiny, electric spark ran up my arm. I wanted to hold her hand, to tell her I understood, that I'd notice her, always. But the words lodged in my throat. I couldn't risk it. Not here, not now. The sudden ring of her phone cut through the tension like a sharp blade. She jumped slightly, fumbling to answer. "Hello." Her tone shifted instantly, polite, distant. The name on the screen made my chest tighten. I could hear fragments. "I said I'd call later." "No. I'm at the shop." The conversation ended quickly, and she hung up, exhaling as if letting go of something she didn't want me to see. Her fingers lingered on the phone for a second, trembling just slightly. We turned back to the engine, and I noticed things I hadn't before. The fine lines at the corner of her eyes when she smiled. Briefly, almost reflexively, the faint scent of her coat, damp but warm. How tired she looked, yet how deliberate each movement remained. I wanted to reach out, to brush a stray lock of hair from her face. I wanted to ask what she really meant, what she was trying not to say, but I didn't. I stayed rooted to the spot, heart hammering, pretending the tightening of my hands on the wrench was the only thing keeping me steady. She stepped back, glancing at me quickly, almost as if she knew the moment suspended between us. Then she smiled. A brief, fleeting thing, loaded with unspoken questions. And just like that, the electricity hung in the air, unresolved, heavy. I watched her walk toward the counter to grab her umbrella. She paused. Our eyes met, longer this time. I could feel the pull between us, sharp and immediate, yet unclaimed. She turned her head slightly, and the next second, the tension broke. I stayed still, wrench in hand, barely breathing. That spark lingered long after she left, and I knew it wasn't over. Not even close. The shop was empty that night. The hum of the overhead lights filled the space in a way that made every sound, my breath, the clink of tools, too loud. She leaned against the counter, arms crossed, the corners of her coat damp from the drizzle outside. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words kept getting stuck. We both knew it. The air was too thick to ignore, too sharp to pretend normal. Finally, she broke the silence, voice low, hesitant. "What are we doing?" The question hit me like a slap I didn't see coming. I froze mid-step, wrench in hand, and just stared. Her eyes were steady, not accusatory, but full of a kind of raw truth I couldn't turn away from. I don't know," I said finally. My voice sounded small, unsure even to me. She nodded slowly, as if expecting that answer, and the silence stretched again, heavy and deliberate. I noticed the fine tremor in her fingers, the way she kept pressing her thumb against her palm, not noticing, or maybe not caring, that I saw. I'm not supposed to feel this," she said, softer now, almost to herself. "I shouldn't be standing here, watching you, thinking about everything." I stepped closer, then stopped, conscious of the space between us. Every instinct screamed to close it, to reach for her hand, to say she didn't have to fight it alone. But I didn't. Instead, I just watched, the tilt of her head, the slight downturn of her lips, the way her eyes flickered with exhaustion and something else I couldn't name. "I feel like I'm losing my mind," she whispered. "Like I'm looking at my life and realizing I've missed so much. And then I see you." And her voice faltered, and she looked away, biting her lip as if to stop herself from saying more. I wanted to tell her it was okay, that none of this was wrong, that she didn't have to carry it all alone. But my throat tightened, and all I could do was nod, silently urging her to keep going. She met my eyes again, and the world outside, the rain, the dark streets, the quiet hum of the shop, fell away. For a moment, it was just us, suspended in something we didn't have words for yet. "I don't know if I can keep pretending this is normal," she said finally, voice trembling slightly. "I don't even know what normal is anymore." Her hand twitched against the counter, brushing a stray paperclip, and I felt the gravity of it, the weight of all the things unsaid, the distance we'd both tried to maintain, collapsing around us. "I'm scared," she admitted. And in that single word, the space between us seemed to stretch, crack, and fold into something fragile and undeniable. I wanted to tell her everything, but I couldn't. Instead, I just stayed there, silently willing her to keep breathing, to stay human in the chaos of our unspoken truths. And as she turned to leave, I saw her shoulders slump, just slightly, and whispered under my breath, though she didn't hear it, "Don't vanish like everyone else." I didn't expect her to show up that evening, not with the rain tapering off and the streetlights flickering against wet asphalt. But there she was, coat draped over one arm, a small envelope in her hand. Her eyes met mine, hesitant but determined. "I found this in the attic," she said softly, holding it out. "Thought maybe you should see it." I took it carefully. The envelope was worn, the handwriting familiar yet fragile, a little smudged at the edges. I didn't open it immediately. Instead, I looked at her, studying the subtle tension in her shoulders, the way her jaw tightened, as if she was holding herself together by threads. "Who is it from?" I asked, voice low. She hesitated, glancing down at the envelope as if the answer scared her. "It's from someone I lost. Long ago." She paused, taking a breath that trembled despite her usual composure. I thought I'd never see anything of him again. I thought I'd moved on." The words hung in the air, heavy with something I couldn't quite name. I noticed the slight quiver in her hands as she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, and my chest tightened. She wasn't just telling me about the letter. She was telling me about herself, her regrets, the quiet spaces where she still ached. I began, unsure what to say. Instead, I let the silence hold us. I could see the vulnerability, she usually kept tucked behind her measured words. Her eyes flicked to mine, searching, questioning, maybe even hoping for some recognition of her pain. "You remind me of him," I whispered finally, almost against my own judgment. The words slipped out before I could filter them. "The way you look at things, the way you hesitate, like the world weighs too much." I stopped, realizing I'd crossed a line, even if it was just internally. She looked down at the envelope again, then back up at me, and the faintest smile touched her lips. Not amused, not joyful, just acknowledging. A flicker of understanding passed between us. "I'm not him," she said quietly. "And I know that. But somehow, holding this, it feels like he's still here, in a way I didn't expect." Her voice cracked for just a fraction of a second, and I noticed it like a thunderclap in a quiet room. I wanted to say more, to tell her that whatever she carried, whatever she lost, wasn't hers alone anymore. But I stayed silent, letting her words sink in, letting the envelope lie heavy in my hands. Finally, she exhaled, turning toward the door, coat draped over her arm again. She paused, just before stepping into the streetlight. I could see the faint shine of tears in her eyes, unspoken, and the vulnerability, the raw, human crack in her carefully constructed exterior, settled in my chest like a weight I couldn't lift. She gave me one last glance. Not a look of longing, not exactly. Something quieter, fiercer, and infinitely more human. Then she left, and I stood there, the envelope clutched lightly, feeling as though the air itself had shifted. The world was the same outside, dripping wet and empty, but inside me, everything had tilted. The repair shop smelled faintly of oil and wet concrete, the late afternoon light stretching long across the floor. I didn't expect her to come in today, not after the envelope, not after the tension that had been building silently between us for weeks. She leaned against the counter again, coat unbuttoned this time, hair still damp from the drizzle outside. No words at first, just the quiet presence, heavy and familiar. I felt my chest tighten. "You don't have to say anything," she murmured, almost to herself, though I knew she meant it for me. I didn't. Instead, I wiped my hands on a rag and met her eyes. They held the same weight they always had, curious, tired, guarded. But now there was something else, surrender. Not to me, exactly, but to the truth of what had been building. We moved around the shop, checking parts, organizing tools, doing small, mundane tasks together. There was no rush, no conversation about feelings, no confessions. Just space shared, side by side. Each glance, each gesture, carried the history of our slow burn. The laughter, the silences, the almost touch moments. At one point, as she reached for a box of parts, our hands brushed. Neither of us flinched. The contact was brief, but deliberate. She didn't pull away, I didn't pull back. It was the quiet acknowledgement of all the unspoken things between us. "I'm glad you're here," I said finally, voice low, careful. Not a declaration, not a plea, just a truth I couldn't contain anymore. She smiled faintly, tilting her head in a way that felt intimate without needing words. "Me too," she replied. Short, simple, enough. We stood there for a long while, neither speaking. The afternoon light shifted, falling softer across her face, highlighting the faint lines around her eyes, the curve of her jaw. I could feel the weight of every pause, every hesitation that had led us here. Then, slowly, naturally, she leaned her forehead against mine. Not dramatically, not as if it were meant to signal the end of anything. Just there, a soft, grounding gesture that made everything else fall away. I rested my hand lightly against her arm. Warm, real, both of us breathing slowly, neither wanting to break the quiet. There were no promises, no plans, no words about the future. Just this, the shared certainty that we had crossed the line of restraint, carefully, together, and that it was right for now. She pulled back slightly, just enough to look at me, eyes steady. I could see the faint tremor in her lips, the tiny catch in her breath, the way her fingers lingered near mine. I smiled, not loudly, not triumphantly, just softly, quietly. And in that small, imperfect, human way, everything shifted. The tension, the longing, the regret. They all collapsed into this moment of earned understanding. We didn't speak again. We didn't need to. We simply stayed there, together, letting the silence hold us. The world outside carried on. The rain had stopped. Inside, everything felt complete, if only for a little while. It's been months since that day in the shop. The day everything shifted without a word being shouted, without any grand gesture. Just a quiet acknowledgement that we couldn't ignore the truth anymore. I still think about it, often, and every time I do, I notice something new. She's changed, though not in ways that are obvious. Her laugh lingers longer now, softer, and there's a weight lifted from her shoulders that wasn't there before. She's still careful, still measured, but there's a flicker of ease in her movements, a small freedom that wasn't present when we first met. I've changed too. I notice more, the tremor in someone's hand, the hesitation in their voice, the subtle signs that a person is holding something back. I've learned to hold myself still and let people reveal themselves at their own pace. Our connection, if you can call it that, has become something quiet, earned. No sweeping declarations, no fairy tale resolution. Just shared space, mutual understanding, and the occasional brush of hands that makes the world pause for a fraction of a second. It's funny, I think, how slow burns leave marks that fireworks never could. We learn that love doesn't always need to announce itself. Sometimes it simply exists, quietly, in gestures that seem insignificant but are everything. I watch her sometimes and remember the envelope, the nights of rain, the silences that were louder than words. And I realize that all of it, every hesitation, every glance, every near mistake, was part of what made this real. What made it human? What made it ours? I don't know what tomorrow holds for us. Maybe we'll continue exactly like this, or maybe life will throw something unexpected our way. But for now, we exist in the moments we've claimed, and that, somehow, is enough. The other day, she smiled at me in the middle of a quiet afternoon, and I thought about how much I've learned from her, about patience, about restraint, about noticing the tiny things that matter. And I realized that the story we created together, imperfect and messy, is more valuable than any story told in grand declarations or dramatic gestures. This is what love can be when it's honest, flawed, and human, a quiet understanding that doesn't need to scream. It's in the pauses, the small touches, the shared space, the recognition of each other's scars. And as I sit here, reflecting, I can't help but smile at the thought of it all. The stormy afternoons, the envelope, the silences, the eventual warmth of this quiet connection. If this story made you feel something, let me know in the comments. Would you want more stories like this?